All right, so let's talk about some other tips. Core values are important, and how you embrace those core values as well as portray them are important. There are some other tips that I think I may have covered briefly, but where I thought it would be good to go more in depth. So I added a few other tips, but wanted to take some time to explain. So again, after you watch the video, you can read the text below, as I may add additional points that I think are important that I may not have covered in this video. But tip number one is adjust how frequently you communicate to your supervisor based on how many people the supervisor manages. So for example, imagine that you're working at a startup and it's a team of 4 people, one manager, one supervisor, and 3 direct reports. In that setting, you can probably talk to your supervisor many, many times a day. And in fact, you may need that close collaboration and communication in order for the startup to be successful. Imagine that the team grows and now you have 10 people, and maybe you still have one supervisor who manages 10 people. At that, the number of communication the supervisor gets goes almost, you may think it goes linearly according to the number of people in the organization. Oftentimes, it's not linear, it's exponential. The number of communications that happen when you have 2 people is just 2. But when you have 3 people, now it becomes more dynamic. 4 people, now 4 people, it just creates a lot more dialogues and conversation. So it's almost 2 to the n, the number of communications that happen as the team grows, and the team is the size n. The number of communications that happens in the team becomes exponential, 2 to the n. So just because the team doubled doesn't mean now your supervisor gets double the email inbox. Sometimes it's 4 times more. Sometimes way more than that, depending on the department and how often they communicate and so forth. So anyway, as the organization grows and your supervisor, let's say, now has multiple direct reports who then supervise other people's work, you can imagine how the supervisor would just constantly get spammed more and more, especially as the organization grows. So imagine that you're working in a company that's 50 people. Now, the number of email communication that original supervisor would get, assuming the original supervisor continue to get promoted, is immense. And I guarantee that person will probably get hundreds of emails a day to process. So again, when the supervisor was only getting maybe 20 emails a day, that's fine. They can manage that, and maybe out of that 20 emails a day, maybe 5 of them came from you, and that's fine. They can manage that. But imagine that supervisor when they get 500 emails a day. The amount of stress that's generated by each email just becomes immense. So the way that you communicate, how often you communicate, really should be a function of how busy your supervisor is. And busy, not just meaning are they busy with work, but it's really how many people does your supervisor directly manages. If you're directly reporting to the CEO of the company who manages, let's say, 200 people, I guarantee that CEO probably doesn't want to be updated every few hours. They don't. It's too much. If everyone reported every few hours in the entire organization, imagine that's 200 times, let's say 4 emails, and then that's not the only emails they get. They get tons of other things. You can see how they would get, easily overwhelmed. So, if your supervisor just manages 3 to 5 people, you can probably talk to them very frequently. If your manager manages 10 people, either directly or indirectly, then you got to be a little bit cautious, and maybe you want to limit how often you update your supervisor to be once a day. If your supervisor is super busy, let's say manages a team of 50 people or 100 people, maybe an update every few days or even an update once a week is sufficient. Because also, when you're an individual contributor, you may need frequent communication. When you're a manager, you don't if you're a manager doesn't want to manage a manager, right? They expect the manager to be managed for themselves, to manage themselves. So anyway, kind of adjusting that frequency of communication based on how many people your supervisor oversees, that's important. And if you don't know what the right frequency is, just go ahead and ask your supervisor, early if possible, when you started working with a supervisor, and just ask them, hey, I do want to make you, I do want to keep you in the loop. I don't want to leave you in the dark, but I also don't want to over communicate because I want to respect your time. What's the ideal scenario? Is it okay for me to send an update once a day? Or do you prefer that I send multiple updates a day? Sometimes, when I have multiple updates, or, do you prefer that I try to be concise and kind of summarize things once a week, every few days, or once a month, once a quarter? So anyway, you can ask them. Okay, so other tip, number 2. Do not just reply all to emails. This is so important. If you worked in a large company, you've probably been involved where people just reply all and you get hundreds of emails from these needless communication where you're thinking, what the heck's going on? Now, you probably got that if you're an individual contributor. If you're a manager or managers or manager of managers, the number of communications that you get, again, becomes exponential. So imagine that you're reporting directly to the CEO who manages, let's say, 50 to 100 people. They already have, let's say, 1,000 emails a day that they need to process. And then they get 20 emails from you when they check their inbox. And then out of that 20 email, they look, and 19 of them, you're just talking to someone else. And I'm thinking, why am I included in this email? Why did you add 20 emails to my inbox when I didn't need to? Right? So if I was the supervisor that, hey, I only want to be updated at maximum once a day, and you sent me 20 emails in your name, that's a huge negative to me. Again, that's, if I'm a CEO, I have 100 people that are reporting to me, I wouldn't like that, right? If I am a CEO of, few hundred people, few thousand people, by then I probably have an assistant that filters all the spams already. So I only see the emails that I really need to see, right? But if I don't have an assistant, your supervisor most likely wouldn't have the assistant to go through the emails and just delete all the spams. Anyway, you got to be careful in that. So an example below the video, just if you reply all and there are 50 people, 20 people, or even 7 people, you should always ask yourself, once you click on reply all, who in this list should I remove? You should really do that. Employees who don't do that, who just reply all and send a message, and their supervisor was involved, their supervisor was copied in that email, you're wasting their time. And not only you're wasting their time, you're sending a signal that you're not respectful of their time. So it may seem a little bit, unintuitive. Sometimes you just have to put yourself in their shoes to find out how they must feel when they get that email. Right? Just put yourself in that scenario that it described, and you will make a little bit more sense why you don't want to just reply all, right? So let's say you work for a supervisor who only wants to hear from you, get an update at maximum once a day, right? Because they already get so many emails. They don't want to spend more mental energy than just digesting one email a day from you, right? Because they don't want to micromanage you. If that's the case, don't send them. Don't CC them on those needless spam email. Instead, what you can do is at the end of the day, say, hey, I wanted to be respectful of your time, so I didn't include you in this conversation. Let me know if you want me to forward you some of the email conversation. But here are some bullet point updates on some of the communications. And if you do that, supervisors will be really, really grateful. Now, again, if your supervisor just manages a few people, maybe it's okay. Maybe they only get 20 emails a day, and it's okay to get 5 emails from you. In fact, it may make them feel like they have a closer bond with you because there is that frequent communication which is needed, again, in a very small team. But hey, just don't make sure you CC the everyone in the company and overwhelm everyone. That's a very, very negative signal and a rookie mistake made by someone who haven't worked in a big company. Another tip, radiate enthusiasm. So someone mentioned about this as a tip for the interview and said this is one of the most important attribute when you're interviewing with a company. I thought, this is strange. Being enthusiastic when you're going through interview, isn't it how well you answer? Isn't it about confidence and all these other things? But as I reflected back in my career interviewing people and working with people, I think there's real truth to this statement that showing enthusiasm or being enthusiastic, I think, may be one of the most important attributes. Now, reflecting back, as I pondered about that statement, I thought about all the meetings I had, all the projects that I given, and all the people that I worked with, individual contributors, managers, executives, CEOs. This is really important because no one wants to work with a robot. No one wants to work with someone who doesn't have passion. So sometimes, people, I think, misinterpret and they feel like in the business setting, you need to leave emotions out and you got to just do the work. I think that's not completely true either. Of course, we got to control our emotions because we're professionals, and sometimes we do work on things, even if you don't think that's the right thing to do. If the supervisor tells you that's what needs to be done, then you get it done, right? No questions asked, you just get it done. But supervisors also don't want to work with people who are dead emotionally or who just don't have any passion. So they give certain projects and you don't seem excited. They're not going to be that excited to give a project to someone who's not excited about the project. So as I reflect back on my career, when I have meetings, either in person or Zoom, I can look at their eyes and see how enthusiastic they are, how eager they are. And some people just seem dead, right? So this is why when you're having Zoom meetings, show your camera. Otherwise, if they see a black screen, if the supervisor sees a black screen, how would they know that you're smiling, you're listening, you're taking notes, that you're listening intently? They don't know. And if they just see a black or your profile picture, you're not going to portray. Even if you're very interested, even if you're very engaged, they're not going to know. So turn the video on. Let them know that you're engaged, right? Be enthusiastic. Now, sometimes you may just not be enthusiastic about the project, and that's okay. And that kind of gives a signal to your supervisor that maybe this is not the project that you're very excited about. But hey, you don't only always get projects that you're super excited about, but try to be enthusiastic about life, about work, about what you do, and that will go a very, very long way. Personally, for me, and again, this is different for a company, but for me, if I see someone who's very enthusiastic, who has a lot of energy, I am more forgiving when they make mistakes because, hey, I know they're trying. Whereas if I see someone who's not very enthusiastic, who just seem dry and dead, I don't even see their facial expression. I feel like I'm talking to a robot. It's very hard for me to relate. So when it comes time for me to promote someone or give a very important project, I lean toward people who show passion, who show energy, because I know that those with passion and energy will do the extra miles, will try to be proactive and so forth. So anyway, try to be enthusiastic and show that. If you just can't be enthusiastic about the company you're working at, you should probably just leave, because you're not doing yourself a favor. You're probably not doing the company a favor either. It's just not a good long-term solution. So I would say if that's the case, you should just leave the company or leave the team. Find another team or find another department where you can be happier and be more enthusiastic about what you're doing. Okay, so these are, again, some of the additional tips. I may add some other tips, later and include some. So just do a quick glance at what I wrote below the video and hope this gives you some additional guidance on how you can more effectively communicate within your company.